The fog still clung to the low ground of my field when the sharp slum of car doors cut through the quiet, followed by a chorus of voices drifting over the wetlands. I set my coffee mug down on the railing and walked out onto the back deck, peering through the haze to figure out what was going on across my land. What I saw left me speechless. Karen Hartley, the self-declared HOA president of our neighborhood, was barking orders to a group of residents as they hauled folding tables, coolers, and portable grills straight through my meticulously preserved conservation meadow. "Put the main buffet table right over there by the pond," she directed in that piercing voice of hers that could shatter crystal. "And keep the grills a good distance from those hideous weeds. I don't want any smoke getting into the potato salad." Those hideous weeds she gestured toward were actually rare purple coneflowers I had spent 3 years cultivating as part of a habitat restoration effort. I stood there in stunned silence as more vehicles arrived, parking along the access road that was plainly marked with private property and no trespassing signs. My name is Marcus Brennan, and 6 months earlier, I had inherited this 40-acre parcel from my late uncle, Theodore. Uncle Ted had been a dedicated wildlife biologist who devoted the final 2 decades of his life to turning this property into a refuge for endangered species. When I took ownership, I vowed to carry on his conservation legacy. The land sits adjacent to the Maple Ridge Estate subdivision, where I also own a modest house, which is unfortunately how I first became familiar with Karen and her iron-fisted HOA regime. This isn't ordinary acreage. It provides vital habitat for several endangered bird species, including the rare golden-cheeked warbler, which nests only in the mature juniper stands found here. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has designated the entire area as critical habitat, complete with strict federal protections and severe penalties for any disturbance. Over the past 6 months, HOA worked hand-in-hand with wildlife agencies to preserve the fragile ecosystem, setting up motion-activated cameras to track animal activity and carefully tending the native vegetation. Karen, however, appeared to operate under the delusion that any undeveloped green space within a mile of her subdivision was automatically available for neighborhood events. She had been coveting my property from the moment I arrived, complaining that it was being wasted and suggesting the community could use the extra space for recreation. I had explained politely but repeatedly that the land was private and federally protected, but Karen suffered from a convenient inability to hear anything that conflicted with her plans. Her encroachments had grown bolder in recent months. It started with her parading her pampered Pomeranian through the meadow despite the posted signs. Then she began leading other board members on inspection walks, insisting she needed to evaluate whether the abandoned property presented any risks to the neighborhood. Each time, I asked her to leave and reminded her of the boundaries. Each time, she dismissed me with a flick of her hand and some vague remark about community entitlement. I recorded every violation, snapping photographs and maintaining detailed records. My attorney, Janet Morrison, had recommended building a strong documentary trail in case matters worsened, watching the chaos now erupting across my conservation meadow. I was thankful for her advice. This had gone far beyond simple trespassing. It was an outright occupation, with Karen treating my protected wildlife sanctuary like her private event space. As more neighbors showed up carrying lawn chairs and Bluetooth speakers, I took out my phone and began filming. One of Karen's followers was erecting a volleyball net directly in a section where we had recently reseeded native grasses. Another cluster was laying out picnic blankets beside the pond, a crucial watering site for countless species. Worst of all were the children running around with butterfly nets, chasing birds while their parents encouraged them as if this were some wholesome outdoor playground. "Excuse me," I shouted, striding down toward the growing crowd. "This is private property. Everyone needs to pack up and leave right now." Karen spun around to face me, her immaculate blonde bob remaining perfectly in place despite the breeze. She wore her standard outfit, crisp khaki capris, a coral polo emblazoned with the HOA emblem, and her usual look of chronic displeasure. "Oh, Marcus," she said with a condescending grin, "don't be such a spoilsport. The HOA's annual spring picnic is a cherished tradition. We've merely relocated it this year to provide our members with more room to appreciate nature. She actually made air quotes around nature, as though the idea offended her. Besides, this field has sat unused for years. It's high time somebody made proper use of it. The land isn't unused, I replied, forcing my voice to stay calm even as fury built inside me. It's a federally protected wildlife habitat. You're standing in a designated conservation zone right now. Endangered species are nesting here. Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. Oh, please. I haven't seen a thing except tall grass and dirty water. You can't possibly expect us to buy that this overgrown mess is some vital nature reserve. That's when Bill Donovan, one of her devoted board allies, piped up. Yeah, and even if it is, the neighborhood's needs ought to take priority. We pay premium prices to live here. We deserve decent facilities. I recognized Bill as the same man who had fined me last month for unauthorized wildlife after a rabbit family dug a burrow near my fence line. Community needs don't supersede federal law, stated flatly. You're trespassing on private land and disrupting protected habitat. I'm asking you once more to leave before I contact the authorities. Karen's phony smile twisted into her more familiar mask of righteous indignation. You wouldn't dare destroy our picnic. Do you have any clue how much effort went into organizing this? We have 150 members coming. The caterers are due any moment. Caterers? I echoed, incredulous. You actually hired caterers for an unauthorized picnic on my property? She flicked her hand as if swatting away a fly. Don't be so theatrical, Marcus. We're only borrowing a bit of empty land for a couple of hours. No real damage done. Actually, you ought to thank us for sprucing the place up. Our being here might even frighten off some of those rats and birds you're so fixated on. That's when I spotted something that turned my stomach to ice. One of the teenagers had started scaling a tall juniper, the exact kind of tree where the golden-cheeked warblers constructed their nests. Get down from there immediately, I yelled, but the boy only grinned and climbed higher, his buddies cheering him on from below. I wheeled back toward Karen. I'm calling 911, she smirked. Be my guest. I'm certain the police will be fascinated to learn how you're attempting to sabotage a wholesome, family-oriented neighborhood gathering. I happen to know the chief quite well. We're on the Chamber of Commerce board together. As she spoke, the mayhem around us intensified. Someone had ignited a portable fire pit perilously near a stand of drought-stressed trees. Children were hurling stones into the pond, upsetting the fragile balance of the ecosystem I had labored to safeguard. I moved a few steps away and dialed 911, calmly describing the trespass and destruction to the dispatcher. Then I phoned Amanda Chen, my primary contact at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She picked up on the second ring. Marcus? What's going on? Her tone sharpened instantly. She knew I wouldn't disturb her on a Saturday morning without good reason. We've got a major problem, I said, eyeing a man who had just emptied a cooler full of ice straight into the pond. The HOA has decided to host their picnic on the protected property. There are well over 100 people here, and they're inflicting serious harm to the habitat. Amanda muttered a curse. Are they interfering with the nesting sites? I glanced toward the juniper stand. Yes, one teenager is climbing a nest tree as we speak. They've started fires, they're trampling the restored sections, and children are pursuing birds with nets. A brief silence followed. Then Amanda's voice hardened into professional steel. Record absolutely everything. Video, photographs, and names, if possible. We're assembling a response team right now. This constitutes a federal offense, and we treat it seriously. I ended the call, switched my phone to video, and began methodically capturing the wreckage. The teenager had made it to the upper branches of the juniper and was vigorously shaking them, while his friends howled with laughter below. A woman was plucking the rare wildflowers to fashion a centerpiece for the buffet table. Children were jabbing sticks into the brush, likely tormenting some innocent snake or lizard desperate to flee the uproar. But the undisputed centerpiece of my footage was Karen. She paraded about like royalty, orchestrating table arrangements, striking poses for pictures, and proclaiming at top volume how the HOA was injecting vitality into this dismal, neglected expanse. At one point, she even delivered an impromptu address on the virtues of community engagement and proactive leadership. Utterly blind to the staggering hypocrisy, the local police arrived first to patrol cars easing onto the access road. I greeted them at the boundary and laid out the facts, presenting my deed and the federal habitat designation documents I now kept handy in my truck. Officer Patricia Rodriguez, who had handled earlier complaints about Karen's incursions, shook her head in disbelief. "We've dealt with Mrs. Hartley in the past," she said quietly, "but this takes the cake. You mentioned federal agents are en route?" I nodded. "They should arrive within the hour. In the meantime, could you at least get that kid down from the tree before he breaks his neck or wrecks a nest?" Officer Rodriguez and her partner waded into the crowd, their uniforms finally drawing Karen's notice. She stormed over, cheeks blazing. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. This gentleman is harassing our peaceful assembly. I'd like to press charges." "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez replied with measured calm, "you're trespassing on private property. This parcel is federally designated protected habitat. You and everyone else must vacate the premises at once." Karen's mouth gapped open and shut in rapid succession. "That can't be right. This is neighborhood land. We've used it for extra parking for years." That explained the mysterious tire ruts I'd noticed near the road. "Do you have any proof of permission to be here?" the officer pressed. Karen blustered. "Proof? It's common knowledge. Everyone understands this is essentially part of the HOA Commons." She spun toward her supporters, who were now observing the exchange with growing unease. "Tell them, Bill. Explain how we've always treated this as community property." Bill, evidently wiser than his earlier bravado suggested, edged backward. "Well, we kind of assumed it, but I suppose we never officially confirmed ownership." His hesitation rippled through the group, like a shark sighting. Suddenly, many HOA members discovered an urgent need to fold chairs and gather coolers. Then the true reinforcements appeared. 3 black SUVs bearing government plates rolled in, and Amanda Chen emerged with her team of federal wildlife agents. They wore tactical vests emblazoned with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service across the back, their faces set in grim determination. Amanda scanned the field with the seasoned gaze of someone who had witnessed far too many ecological crimes, her expression darkening as she took in the smoldering fire pit and the children still pestering wildlife. "I am Special Agent Chen with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service," she declared, her voice projecting effortlessly across the meadow. "This area is federally protected critical habitat under the Endangered Species Act. Every person present is presently violating federal law. Cease all activities immediately and prepare to present identification." The festive mood vanished quicker than mist under a hot sun. Parents snatched up their kids, yanking them away from the chaotic games. The teenager up in the juniper scrambled down in a frantic rush, nearly losing his footing on the way. Karen, though, refused to concede. She strode straight toward Amanda, chin lifted defiantly, hands planted firmly on her hips. "This is absurd," she snapped. "We're law-abiding, tax-paying residents holding a simple neighborhood picnic. Since when does that qualify as a federal crime?" Amanda's face remained impassive. "Since you chose to stage it in designated critical habitat for endangered species. Are you the individual who organized this gathering?" "I am the president of the Maple Ridge Estates HOA," Karen announced with obvious pride, as though the title might impress federal officers. "And I personally approved this venue for our yearly spring picnic. Mr. Brennan and I have had some differences over land usage, but I hardly believe that justifies summoning federal authorities." Amanda retrieved a tablet and started entering information. "So you're confirming that you planned and authorized this event on protected federal land without obtaining permission?" For the first time, a shadow of doubt crossed Karen's features. "Well, we assumed the property was vacant and available." Her words faltered as she caught sight of an agent capturing images of the ravaged wildflower patches. Another was meticulously recording the dangerous closeness of the fire pit to the safeguarded trees. A third agent trained a high-resolution camera on the juniper the boy had scaled. "Ma'am," Amanda continued in an icy professional tone, "I require your identification." You are being issued citations for numerous violations of the Endangered Species Act, among them unauthorized access to critical habitat, harassment of protected wildlife, and destruction of endangered flora. Karen's complexion drained from flushed crimson to ghostly pale in seconds. Citations? You mean fines? This is outrageous. We didn't destroy anything important, just some grass and ordinary trees. Then one of the agents shouted from the juniper stand. Agent Chen, we've located a demolished nest, consistent with golden-cheeked warbler materials. Recent disturbance. Amanda's eyes narrowed further. Record it in detail, photographs from all sides. She faced Karen again. The intentional or reckless destruction of an endangered species nest constitutes a grave federal felony. Penalties may reach $50,000 in fines and up to 1 year of imprisonment per incident. What remained of the crowd dispersed like a flock of spooked pigeons. Tables stood forsaken, coolers abandoned, as families bolted for their vehicles. Only Karen's inner circle of bored loyalists lingered, clustered nervously together. Bill Donovan appeared on the verge of collapse. Margaret Peterson, the HOA secretary, hammered away at her phone screen, no doubt hunting for legal counsel. I kept filming while Amanda's team systematically cataloged every infraction. They collected soil samples where cooler contents had spilled chemicals. They photographed each flattened plant, each disrupted nesting location, each scrap of garbage. The mounting evidence became overwhelming. Karen attempted interruptions, repeatedly veering between threats of countersuits and forced friendliness, but the agents paid her no mind. Eventually, Amanda walked over to me, tablet in hand. Mr. Brennan, I'll need a complete formal statement regarding today's incident, plus any prior trespassing occurrences. Over the next 20 minutes, I recounted Karen's progressive boundary violations, the initial dog walks, the so-called inspection visits, culminating in this massive takeover. Amanda listened intently, interjecting only for clarification or more specifics. We'll require copies of your entire documentation, she stated when I concluded. Videos, photographs, emails, everything. Given the scale of damage, the deliberate ignoring of warnings, and the involvement of children in wildlife disturbance, this will become a major enforcement action with multiple federal charges. Karen, standing near enough to hear, finally seemed to comprehend the seriousness. Multiple charges? But I didn't realize how could I know about some obscure bird regulation. Amanda regarded her with thinly veiled contempt. Ignorance is not an excuse under the law, particularly when the property displays clear federal signage. Furthermore, Mr. Brennan reports having personally warned you repeatedly about the protected designation. Is that accurate? Karen's lips moved soundlessly. For perhaps the first moment ever, she was utterly speechless. The agents continued their work for another 2 hours, logging destruction and collecting statements from all participants. Parents grew visibly panicked upon learning they could face liability for their children's actions. The teenager who had climbed the tree wept openly as his mother and father absorbed the possibility of federal charges against their son for nest destruction. By the time the sun climbed high overhead, the full scope of devastation emerged. The restoration zones I had nurtured for months lay ruined and compacted. The pond's sensitive balance suffered from litter and contaminants. 3 verified nest locations were either disturbed or obliterated. Years of dedicated conservation warders in one morning, by unchecked arrogance. Amanda convened her team for a closing evaluation. The tally of offenses was extensive: unlawful entry into critical habitat, harassment of endangered animals, destruction of protected plants, damage to active nesting sites, and introduction of pollutants into safeguarded waters. And since Karen had orchestrated and advertised the event, she faced supplementary counts of conspiracy and inducement of others to break federal statutes. Mrs. Hartley, Amanda declared officially, you are hereby served with multiple citations pursuant to the Endangered Species Act. A federal court summons will follow within 30 days. Considering the documented damage and your central organizing role, You're potentially liable for fines surpassing $200,000 and imprisonment of up to 1 year per destroyed nest. Karen's knees gave way. Bill and another board member lunged to steady her before she collapsed. $200,000, she murmured in shock. Federal prison. But it was only a picnic.